What is the Civil Rights Movement by Sherri L. Smith? Today we continue reading chapters 3 and 4. So let's continue at chapter 3, the Montgomery Bus Boycott. If you ask people when the Civil Rights Movement really began, some will say in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. On December 1st, a woman named Rosa Parks was riding home on a bus. Parks was a seamstress and she was tired after a long day of work. She was also tired of the racist rules for bus seating. When the driver asked her to give her seat to a white person, she refused. The bus driver said he would call the police. Parks said, "Go ahead." She was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, but she was determined to stand up to injustice by staying put. Two policemen arrived on the scene. Parks asked one of them, "Why do you push us around?" The white officer replied, "I don't know, but the law is the law and you're under arrest." That arrest led to the year-long Montgomery bus boycott. A boycott is when a group of people refuse to buy or use a certain item or service. The next day, volunteers sent flyers around the city asking folks to stop riding the public buses for a single day. On Monday, December 5th, over 90% of all black riders boycotted. They walked, carpooled, or rode bikes to work and school. Buses moved through the city nearly empty. The protest worked so well they decided to keep it going. A young minister became the leader of the boycott. His name was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So here's Rosa Parks, and over here is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Under Dr. King, the boycott swelled from one day to a full year. The protesters had three simple goals. Number one, to be treated with courtesy by white bus drivers. Number two, to have first come, first served seating regardless of skin color. And number three, to have black bus drivers in black neighborhoods. A black group called the Montgomery Improvement Association bought station wagons to use as taxicabs to help boycotters travel to their jobs. Women raised money to pay for the cars, gas, and insurance by selling food. The bus company was losing money daily. Without buses to bring black customers downtown, white owned stores began to lose business. The Montgomery Bus Company tried to punish the boycotters by stopping service to black neighborhoods. Some white people threw fire bombs at Dr. King's house. Four local churches were bombed. King and other boycotters were arrested. They were told to pay a $500 fine or spend a year in jail. But the black community would not give up. In February 1956, a black woman named Aurelia Browder joined forces with Claudette Colvin, Mary Louise Smith, and Susie McDonald to file a lawsuit against the mayor of Montgomery. It was dangerous for a black person to sue a white person, but Browder said, "If you live and you haven't stood for anything, you didn't live for anything either." On December 20th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Montgomery's segregation laws unconstitutional. Browder had won. The Montgomery bus boycott was over. It had lasted 381 days and cost the city of Montgomery nearly $1 million. The following morning, the boycott leaders sat in the front row of the first desegregated bus. A major victory had been won for civil rights. The Club from Nowhere. Georgia Gilmore worked as a cook at a segregated lunch counter. She was determined to do her part to help the Montgomery bus boycott. Many people were afraid to openly support the boycott. Their white bosses and landlords might get angry. So Gilmore came up with a plan for women to sell food and give their earnings to the boycott. If anyone asked where the money came from, they'd reply, "Nowhere." And so the women became known as the Club from Nowhere. They made fried chicken, pork chops, and sweet potato pies to raise money for the cause. It's possible her involvement cost Gilmore her job. Dr. King encouraged her to open a restaurant. She did so successfully inside her own home. She even cooked for presidents. Here's Georgia Gilmore. Emmett Till, 1941 to 1955. "We want to see the boy from Chicago." Those were the words of the two white men who showed up in the middle of the night at a house in Mississippi. They were looking for 14-year-old Emmett Till. Emmett was a sweet-faced black kid who loved to tell jokes. In the summer of 1955, Emmett traveled to Mississippi to visit relatives. His mother had not wanted him to go. Chicago had its race problems, but the South was particularly dangerous for black boys. On the night of August 24th, Emmett and his cousins went into Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market in Money, Mississippi. The cashier was a white woman named Carolyn Bryant. What happened next is uncertain. Carolyn told her husband and brother in law that Emmett had grabbed her and asked her for a date. A few days later, a group of men lynched Emmett. His body was found 3 days later by a group of boys out fishing. Newspapers around the world carried the story and the photo of Emmett's body. The attention shined a spotlight on lynching, but the all white, all male jury set his killers free. A few months later, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery, she said, I thought of Emmett Till, and I just couldn't go back. Chapter 4, The Lunch Counter Sit-ins. The Montgomery bus boycott was a nonviolent protest. Many civil rights protesters first learned about nonviolence from Dr. King. He followed the beliefs of an activist in India named Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi said, when violence appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent. On February 1st, 1960, another kind of peaceful protest began. It too changed the way black people were treated in America. It started with four friends who were students at an all black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. They stood up for their rights by sitting down. Their local Woolworth store had a whites only lunch counter. Joseph McNeil was one of the students who started the protest. He said, to face this kind of experience and not challenge it meant we were part of the problem. That Monday afternoon, the four friends each purchased something in the store. Then they took seats at the lunch counter. I'm sorry, we don't serve colored here, the white waitress told them. McNeil and his friends had been inspired by Dr. King's sermons on nonviolent protest. They politely showed the waitress and the diner's manager receipts for what they'd bought. Some white patrons cursed at them, some encouraged them. The four men feared for their lives, but they held fast. They were not served that day, but they were not arrested either. They didn't go home until the store closed. Word of their protest traveled, and the young men became known as the Greensboro Four. Their sit in launched a new era of student involvement in the civil rights movement. The next day, more students joined the Greensboro Four at Woolworth. The following day, over 60 students filled most of the seats in the diner. By the end of the week, hundreds of black and sympathetic white students crowded into lunch counters across the city. The action was compared to the Boston Tea Party that helped start the American Revolution. The Greensboro Coffee Party lasted 6 months and ended in victory. Woolworth desegregated its diners. At last, Joseph McNeil was able to sit down at the counter and eat a slice of apple pie. Greensboro was one of the first cities where sit ins took place, but it wasn't the last. Young people around the country decided to have sit ins in their own towns. One of these people was a college student in Nashville, Tennessee. His name was John Lewis. Along with fellow student Diane Nash and activist James Lawson, he helped form the Nashville student movement. Here's John Lewis. On February 13th, 1960, John and others led hundreds of black and white students in sit ins around Nashville. They were refused service at every lunch counter. White managers turned off the lights and closed the diners around them. The students sat in the dark until the end of the day. After a few days of sit ins, the police threatened to arrest the students. Angry white people beat and insulted them. Dr. King liked the young people's energy. He invited them to join his group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. But the students thought the SCLC was too old fashioned. Instead, they started their own group. It was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, pronounced SNCC for short. SNCC came up with a plan they called Jail No Bail. They got arrested and filled up the jails until the police couldn't arrest any more people. Then SNCC marched to City Hall. The mayor of Nashville was waiting on the steps. He was afraid the sit ins would lead to violence. Diane Nash asked him, do you recommend that lunch counters be desegregated? The mayor replied, yes. SNCC had succeeded in just 3 months. The group was a new force in the civil rights movement, one that would play a big part in the future protests. SNCC rules of nonviolence. Before the first sit-in, Lewis wrote up a list of nonviolent do's and don'ts to follow. Do not strike back nor curse if abused. Laugh out loud. Laugh out. Hold conversations with floor walker. Leave your seat until your leader has given you permission to do so, or block entrances to stores outside nor the aisles inside. Do show yourself friendly and courteous at all times. Sit straight, always face the counter. Report all serious incidents to your leader. Refer information seekers to your leader in a polite manner. Remember the teachings of Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. Love and nonviolence is the way. May God bless each of you. So next time we will read chapter 5, but Wow, look at the effect that nonviolent protests has had. They've already gotten a lot accomplished, even though they still have a long way to go.